The Clinton administration was particularly impressed with President Gaviria, who was presiding over most of these atrocities. They described him as very forward-looking in helping developing democratic institutions under conditions of great danger, which was true. Didn't add that the danger was mostly due to his administration and our support for it. He was also, they said, forward-looking in carrying out economic reforms and helping integrate Colombia into the international economy. Know how to decode those words. And as a result of these forward-looking attitudes, the U.S. insisted that he be appointed Secretary General of the Organization of American States, as he was. This is a rich country. It's a country of enormous resources. Latin America is the area of the world that has the worst distribution of wealth anywhere. Very high concentration of wealth and land ownership, enormous poverty in the midst of plenty of wealth. Colombia probably has the record in Latin America for inequality, for concentration of wealth, land ownership, massive poverty. It's gotten considerably worse in the last 10 or 20 years as a result of the so-called neoliberal policies, which have concentrated wealth even further, increased poverty and misery. As I say, it's now past over 50% living under the poverty line, which is extremely low. This has always, having nothing to do with drugs, long before there were drug issues, this has been the source of enormous violence. Peasant revolutions, massive terror and destruction. It's been going on for a long time, in fact, for 100 years. It got worse, much worse, in the early 1960s, changed radically. In the early 1960s, the U.S. moved in force under the Kennedy administration. This was part of Kennedy's general program, it focused a lot of attention in the administration on Latin America. And one of the most important things they did with a long-lasting effect was to shift the mission of the Latin American military, which is essentially controlled by the United States. So they shifted the mission of the military from hemispheric defense to internal security. Those are the technical words. A hemispheric defense was a holdover from the Second World War. There was nobody to defend the hemisphere against except Washington, and that's not what they had in mind. So it was hemispheric defense was kind of just a cover for having big armies. Internal security is no joke, though. That means war against your own populations. The new policies and the new armaments and training that went along with them, in fact, led to a major war against the populations of the Western Hemisphere, from the Southern Cone and Chile and Argentina up to the Caribbean and Mexico. Terrible atrocities. They peaked in the 1980s with the wars in Central America, which I don't have to talk about. Colombia was one of the places targeted for these changes. In 1962, a U.S. military mission went to Colombia headed by General Yarborough, a Special Forces general, and he gave advice to the Colombian military about how to deal with the internal problems they were having. The advice was to develop paramilitary and terrorist activities. Those are the terms of the report. Paramilitary and terrorist activities against known communist proponents. Well, the phrase known communist proponents means priests, nuns, human rights workers, journalists, anybody who's not supporting the brutal and miserable power system. They're known communist proponents, and they're to be targeted by paramilitary terrorist activities. This wasn't just advice. It went along with military missions, training, armaments, and in fact changed significantly the level of the modalities and the level of atrocities in Colombia. It turned it essentially into a war of terror, largely through paramilitary organizations against elements of the society which were trying to change these brutal and vicious socioeconomic conditions. And that leads us right up to the present.